He said it like I wasn't even standing there. Just a black waitress, he laughed loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Probably plays the tambourine at some church potluck. The table roared. I smiled. Not because it was funny, not because I agreed, but because I had to. Because when you wear the apron and carry the tray, people think they own your silence. But he didn't know about the piano. And he sure didn't know about me. He just wanted a show. He got one. And when I looked up from the keys, he was choking on his $300 steak. I've been in service work for 5 years now. High-end restaurants, mostly the kind where the wine lists are thicker than the menus and the tips depend on how invisible you can make yourself. You learn how to smile through anything. Wine spilled on your blouse, smile. Creepy hand on your wrist, smile. Backhanded compliments about your race, your voice, your hair, smile. It's a skill, a survival instinct, but it wasn't always like that for me. There was a time when people clapped when I entered a room, not when I left it. I was 6 when my grandmother sat me in front of a dusty, upright piano in her living room in Columbia, South Carolina. "Your mama sings in the choir," she said, "but you baby, you gonna speak with your hands." And I did. The first time I played, I didn't just feel the music, I saw it. Like color in motion, like something ancient waking up inside me. We didn't have much growing up. But that piano, that was our treasure. My grandma cleaned houses for white families who wouldn't let her use the front door, but she never once missed a recital. She called me her little miracle in a minor. I got good, really good. By 16, I had offers from small colleges. A teacher said I had Juilliard potential. But Juilliard doesn't accept food stamps, and neither did USC. My mom had passed by then, and Grandma's lungs were giving out. So I stayed. Got 2 jobs, paid bills, and music, well, music waited. When I moved to Raleigh 2 years ago, I told myself I'd give it one more shot. I found this restaurant, Palmer and King Fancy Crowd Live Jazz Clean Uniforms. I took the job because of the grand piano by the window. I thought maybe someday someone would call in sick and they'd ask me to play. They never did. I was the girl with the apron, the smile, the tray. And that night, the night it all changed, I was just trying to get through my shift. We were packed. Wine flowing like water, rich people complaining their duck was overcooked when it was actually perfect. I had the back left section near the piano. It's where we usually put the show-offs. The birthday boys, the proposal tables, the ones who need to feel like the night belongs to them. That's when he walked in. Mr. Kingston. Tailored navy suit, pocket square. Rolex so shiny it looked rented. He didn't walk, he floated. Like the floor wasn't allowed to touch his shoes. He had 2 other men with him, both younger and a blonde woman, with diamond earrings that probably had names. "Back left," the host whispered to me, "you've got Kingston tonight." I'd heard stories. Real estate magnate, private planes, the kind of man who sues people just to watch them sweat. I straightened my posture, checked my teeth in a spoon, and walked over with my notepad. "Good evening, sir," I said, polite but neutral. "Can I start you off with still or sparkling?" He didn't look at the menu. He looked at me. "Still," he said. "And your name is?" "Imani," I replied. "I'll be taking care of you this evening." "Imani," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting it. "That's exotic." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I've heard worse. I nodded once and turned to get the water. From the corner of my eye, I saw him smirk and whisper something to his friend. That was strike 1. When I returned, he was ready to order. Filet medium rare, asparagus, truffle risotto, his drink. An obscenely expensive single malt neat, of course. I took the rest of the table's order, smiled, and walked away. By the time appetizers hit the table, he'd already made 3 more comments. One about my elegant posture, another about how surprising it was to see a woman like me in a place like this. The third, he asked if I could read French when I described the wine. I laughed it off, not because it was funny, because the room was full, because my rent was due, because bills don't care about your pride. Then came the moment, the one I still replay in my head like slow motion. They were on the main course. He was chewing slowly, glass of wine in hand, and said to the whole table, Back in the day, we had real entertainment in places like this. Singers, dancers, not just servers. He turned to me. I felt it coming. I bet you sing, don't you, Imani? Or maybe piano. I froze. His voice dropped an octave still loud enough to carry. Tell us, do you play something? Or just take orders? The table laughed. Not cruelly, just comfortably. Like this was all part of the act. Like I was part of the act. I looked at him. My throat burned. My palms stung. But I smiled. That's when he said it. She's just a black waitress, fellas. She's not Mozart. He laughed. And I smiled again. Because I knew something he didn't. I didn't break. Not that night. Not for him. I'd learned early that men like Mr. Kingston, rich, restless, and bored, didn't actually want you to break. They wanted to see you bend. They wanted to see how far they could push you while you still smiled through it. So I stood there, tray in hand, still and composed, while they laughed like I was part of the entertainment, like I was some kind of dinner trick they could wind up and dismiss when the wine ran out. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of him. He thought he had the upper hand because I was wearing an apron. But I knew better. He didn't see a person. But I saw everything. The rest of the dining room buzzed as usual. But at that table, it was like being under a spotlight. Every movement I made felt choreographed, measured. The men slouched back in their chairs, drunk on status, while the woman in diamonds leaned in like she was watching a stage play. "Bring us the Bordeaux, Kingston," said, waving his hand like a magician summoning a rabbit. The good one. I nodded. No, yes, sir. No charm, just a nod. I brought the wine. I poured with a steady hand. I cleared the appetizers. I watched him drop another $50 tip on the table mid-meal like it was bait. "You're good at this," he said, eyeing me. "You ever consider working private events?" I knew what he meant. I smiled, shook my head. "I'm good right here." That was when he leaned back and said it. "To be honest, I just don't see how someone like you ends up here. You're polished, smart. You're not loud like the rest." The rest? I wanted to throw the wine in his face. Instead, I said, "Maybe I'm just observant." "Oh," he grinned. "What do you see?" I looked around his table, custom suits, fake laughter, shallow stares, and said, "More than I'm paid to." His smirk faltered just slightly, but he recovered fast. "A smart mouth," he said, chuckling. "And musical talent, too. Imani, you're full of surprises." "I just take orders," I said flatly, playing dumb. His eyes lit up like he'd won something. By dessert, he was full of scotch and ego. That's when he decided it was time to take the joke further. He tapped his spoon on a glass. Clink, clink, clink. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loud enough to turn heads. "Did you know our lovely waitress here plays piano?" I froze behind him, holding a coffee pot mid-pour. "She's being modest," he said, motioning to me like a prop. "But I say, we give her the floor. What do you say?" A few curious diners glanced our way. I stayed silent. "I'm sure the management won't mind," he continued, raising his voice. "The piano's been gathering dust all night. Let's hear a little something from our in-house talent." Then he looked at me smiling like he just handed me a gift. Well, now here's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't always hit like a slap. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, like cold water dripping down the back of your neck. My heart was pounding, not out of fear, out of heat, rage, embarrassment. Everyone was watching now. Some curious, some amused, a few uncomfortable. The manager stood frozen by the bar. He wasn't going to stop it. Not for me. "I really shouldn't," I said quietly. "It's not appropriate." But Kingston raised his glass and said, "Nonsense. Music is always appropriate. Come now, show us what you've got." I looked at the piano. I hadn't touched one in over a year. Then he added loud and mocking, "Unless, of course, you're just a storyteller." That did it. The word "just" again, like I was a fraud, a liar, a nobody. I walked toward the piano, slowly still holding the coffee pot, as if my body hadn't caught up with my mind. Each step was heavier than the last. I could feel the stares. I could hear someone whisper, "Is she really gonna play?" And then someone else say, She better not mess this up. I set the pot down on a side table and ran my fingers once over my apron to steady myself. And then I sat at the keys. The last time I sat like this was at my grandmother's funeral. I'd played her favorite hymn with trembling hands in front of a packed church, barely able to breathe through the grief. But I played. Because she'd asked me to. Because it was the only thing I knew how to do when words failed. And now here I was again. A different audience. Same fight. Kingston was still chuckling. "Let's go," he called out. "We're waiting." I cracked my knuckles softly. My fingers didn't shake. Not this time. I wasn't going to play for him. I was going to play because of him. When I touched the keys, I didn't press down right away. I just let my fingertips rest there. Cool, smooth, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. It was like they were waiting for me, like the room hadn't heard real music in a long time and was holding its breath. I wasn't dressed for a concert. I wasn't standing in front of a roaring crowd. But somehow, this moment felt bigger. I could feel his stare burning through the back of my neck. But I didn't look at him. I wouldn't give him that. Instead, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift somewhere else. The restaurant noise faded. In my head, I was back on my grandmother's porch, summer cicadas, buzzing in the trees, her humming something under her breath while I picked out chords on the old piano that always leaned a little to the left. She used to say, "Don't play it perfect, baby. Play it honest." So I did. I started with a slow minor chord progression. Something simple. Something clean. And as I played, the music told its own story. Each note carried a memory. The E flat was my mother's voice, warm but tired. The D minor that followed was for the months we had the lights off and used candles to do our homework. A gentle tremolo in the right hand brought back the sound of church choirs and gospel Sundays, where everybody smelled like cocoa butter and hope. Then the melody began to rise my fingers, chasing it up the scale like a child chasing fireflies through tall grass. I didn't rush it. The room didn't move. I could sense when the forks stopped clinking, when the conversations faded into nothing. And that's when I knew I had them. All of them. The left hand fell into a deeper rhythm, steady, rooted, like a heartbeat. The right floated above a mixture of classical structure and raw gospel soul. I hadn't even planned to play anything specific, but the moment I touched those keys, the music decided for me. It was like something inside me uncoiled, stretched out, and poured itself into the room. I heard someone gasp softly. Then nothing. Just music. Halfway through, I opened my eyes. The lights seemed softer now. Or maybe I was just seeing clearly for the first time in months. The dining room wasn't just filled with customers anymore. It was filled with witnesses. Even the kitchen door had stopped swinging. The bartenders leaned on the counter, mouths slightly open. Servers had paused mid-step, drinks in hand, just watching. Then I saw Kingston, leaning back in his chair, lips parted slightly, scotch forgotten on the table. He wasn't smirking anymore. He looked stunned, like he'd cracked a joke and the punchline had turned into a sermon. And I realized, with a kind of calm I didn't expect, I wasn't performing, I was remembering who I was. I hit a build-up section, octaves pounding with purpose, and imagined every moment someone had told me I wouldn't make it. Every time a teacher said I was good for someone like me. Every piano competition where I was the only black girl in the room and got the slow claps, the pity ribbons. Every job interview where I dressed twice as sharp and smiled twice as hard just to be told I wasn't the right fit. It all came out through my hands. Not with rage, not with bitterness, but with clarity. By the time I transitioned into the final chord progression, my breathing was slow and deep. My fingers moved like they weren't even attached to me anymore. They were flying. And then came the end. A soft high C left to linger. No dramatic finale, just a single note. Like a prayer hanging in the air waiting to be heard. I held it. Let it breathe. And when I finally lifted my hands off the keys, the silence in the room was louder than any applause I'd ever heard. I turned slightly, not enough to make it dramatic, just enough to see if anyone was still breathing. They were, but barely. Every eye was on me. Some mouths open, some eyes wet. Even the woman in diamonds had her hand over her heart. And Kingston! He was gripping his fork like he'd forgotten how to use it. In that moment, the only sound in the entire room was the soft clink of his steak knife hitting the edge of his plate. I stood, smoothed out my apron, and walked back toward the kitchen, slow, deliberate. No one said a word, not even him. As I walked back toward the kitchen, I didn't rush. My shoes clicked softly on the hardwood floor, the only sound in a room that moments ago had been alive with clinking glasses and polite laughter. Now it was silent. It wasn't just that I'd played well. It was that I had revealed something none of them were ready to see. I wasn't just a waitress. I was something they didn't have a category for. And for a moment, they didn't know how to handle that. Especially him. The kitchen door swung shut behind me, and the sound of pans clattering and chefs shouting came crashing back in. Miguel, one of the line cooks, stood frozen with a ladle in his hand. "Girl," he whispered, "what the hell did you just do out there?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I went straight to the staff sink, turned on the cold water, and let it run over my hands. They were trembling now, but not from fear. From release. From everything that had been locked up inside me, finally being let go through 88 black and white keys. I thought about my grandmother. She died when I was 19, holding my hand and humming Precious Lord with what little breath she had left. That hymn was the first thing she taught me to play. Not Twinkle Twinkle, not Scales, a song about strength in the middle of loss. She'd say, anyone can play a happy song, baby. But if you can play something that makes somebody stop chewing just to listen, then you've got something real. I'd forgotten that for a long time. But tonight I remembered. I stepped back into the main room a few minutes later, tray in hand, like nothing had happened. People were still eating, but it was quieter now. Not awkward, but reverent. Like they didn't want to disturb the echo of what had just happened. At one table, an older couple gave me a gentle nod. At another, a teenage girl mouthed, "That was amazing." I smiled politely, kept walking. Then I saw him, Mr. Kingston, still at his table, still trying to pretend he was the same man from before. But he wasn't laughing now. He wasn't leaning back in his chair like a king. He was stiff, eyes locked on his plate, fork halfway to his mouth. He took a bite of his steak. Then another. And that's when it happened. It was subtle at first. He coughed once, then again harder. His companion looked overconcerned. "You okay?" Kingston tried to wave it off, but he couldn't speak. His face turned red, then purple. He clutched his throat and stumbled back in his chair, eyes bulging. People gasped. A few stood. One of the younger men at his table shouted, "Somebody help!" A waiter dropped a tray of wine glasses and rushed forward. And me, I stood frozen at the edge of the dining room watching. Time slowed. I should have run over. I was trained in first aid. I'd taken the course twice. I knew exactly what to do. But I didn't move. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite. I just didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something. For once, I didn't owe him anything. Not my smile. Not my help. Not even my hands. Another waiter got behind him, performed the Heimlich. 3 thrusts. 4. A thick, half-chewed piece of steak flew from Kingston's mouth and landed on the floor with a wet smack. He collapsed forward, gasping, sweating, humiliated. Alive. But not the same. The room was deadly quiet again. All eyes turned to me, but I didn't say a word. I just turned away, picked up a half-empty water pitcher, and walked calmly to another table. "Would you like a refill?" I asked an elderly man at table 4. He looked at me like I was magic. "I would," he said softly. I poured, nodded, and moved on. Behind me, Mr. Kingston slumped in his seat, breathing hard, defeated in every way that mattered. His ego had almost killed him. But it was my music that finished the job. They say humiliation is a private thing, that it happens behind closed doors, inside hushed offices, or in lonely bathrooms with the fan running and the faucet dripping to drown out the sound of tears. But that night, it happened in the brightest corner of the most expensive restaurant in Raleigh. And the whole room watched. After the choking, the noise never fully returned. The conversations resumed lightly, awkwardly, but the energy had changed. It was like watching actors pretend the curtain hadn't already dropped. Kingston sat slumped over in his chair, pale and dazed, dabbing sweat from his neck with a linen napkin. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Not even mine. Which, to be honest, surprised me. I thought he might get angry. Thought he might lash out, blame the steak, the waiter, even the air. But no, he just sat there, like a balloon that had finally run out of hot breath. His companions tried to smooth things over. They laughed a little too loudly at nothing in particular, sipped their drinks like nothing had happened. One of them nudged the other and whispered, "That girl can play, though." I heard it. And I filed it away, because that was the first time anyone at that table saw me as anything other than service. My section started filling with new customers around 9:15, but the staff were still buzzing about what had happened. "Girl, you could have let him die," Miguel whispered when I passed the kitchen window. "I didn't have to," I replied. "He already did." A few tables over a middle-aged woman called me over. She wore pearls and had the kind of posture that said finishing school and legacy admissions. "You played beautifully," she said as I refilled her husband's glass. "Where did you train?" "Nowhere," I replied. "I just practiced." She looked stunned. "That's impossible." "Isn't it?" I said and walked away. I kept working. That's the thing. They don't tell you about revenge. It doesn't stop the bills from coming. So I cleared dessert plates. I offered coffee and creme brulee. I smiled when someone called me sweetheart, and I nodded when a man explained how to pronounce Syra, like I hadn't been recommending wine pairings for 3 years. But all of it felt different. Lighter. Like the apron didn't cling so tight to my chest anymore. Around 10:20, the check dropped on Kingston's table. He stared at it for a long time, as if reading the total would summon another round of humiliation. Then he waved me over. I walked slowly, calm, centered. "You made your point?" he said without looking up. His voice was thin, raspy. "No need to rub it in." I tilted my head. I didn't say anything. He finally looked at me. His eyes weren't cruel anymore. They were tired. "You planned that, didn't you?" he asked. "The whole performance. You knew what you were doing." I smiled faintly. I knew what I needed. "And what was that?" I paused. "To remember who I am." He signed the check. "Big tip." "Too big." "Guilt money." I didn't touch it. I let my manager handle that part. As I turned to leave, he added, "You've got talent. You should be somewhere else." Maybe I said, but talent was never the problem. He didn't ask what was. Didn't have to. He knew. Just as I was about to head into the kitchen, one of his guests stopped me. Younger man, soft voice, kind eyes. "I just wanted to say, that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years," he said. "Thank you," I replied genuinely. "That means a lot." He hesitated. "You don't have a record or something, do you?" I shook my head. "Just hands. And a memory." He smiled. "Well, if you ever play again, I'd love to know." I nodded. "I will." And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. The night ended quietly. Kingston's group slipped out without their usual drama. No grand exit, no final toast. Just silence, and the soft tap of expensive shoes trying to disappear. I stood at the window after my shift, watching them load into their black SUV like ghosts. He didn't look back. And I didn't care. Later that night, I walked home through cool streets and flickering lamplight, my hands stuffed in my coat pockets. My apartment was small, the walls thin, the radiator moody, but the upright piano in the corner was waiting for me. It wasn't pretty. The keys were chipped. One of the pedals stuck. But it was mine. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and played the same piece I played in the restaurant. This time for no one. This time for me, because I'd remembered something important that night. I don't need anyone's permission to be who I am. Not even his. 2 days passed before I saw his name again. It showed up in the reservation log, Mr. Kingston. Party of 2, Friday night, 8:00 p.m., same handwriting, same seat request, back left corner near the piano. My stomach didn't twist this time. I just stared at it, then closed the book. If he wanted another show, he'd have to bring more than money this time. Friday came and he walked in right on schedule. No entourage. No diamond-draped women. Just him and a thin, leather-bound journal tucked under his arm like it might protect him. He looked around nervously, then spotted me across the room. His expression didn't carry the old arrogance, it carried weight. The kind people wear when they've been seen for who they really are. I didn't approach him first. I waited. Let him request me. He did. When I arrived at his table, he didn't speak right away. Didn't joke, didn't smirk. He just said, "Thank you for coming over," like it was a confession. I nodded. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water's fine," he replied. "And if you have a moment later, I'd like to speak. Privately." My posture didn't shift. My smile didn't crack. But inside, I could feel the old ache rising. "Sure," I said softly. "After my section clears." Later, after the rush died down and the room dimmed into dessert and digestives, I met him on the terrace. He stood hands clasped in front of him, his usual confidence gone. "I owe you an apology," he said. "What I did, what I said, it wasn't just rude, it was ignorant." I let him speak. He fumbled through it. Words like impulsive, embarrassing, unfair. But I wasn't looking for the right words. I was listening for truth. And when he said this, I knew. I tried to shrink you in front of people to feel taller myself. But when you played, I realized how small I actually am. I didn't flinch, didn't nod. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I didn't play to prove you wrong. I played to remember I was right." He looked away. That's when he pulled out the journal. "This is mine," he said. "I write in it sometimes. Sketch ideas, business plans, things I wish I'd said." He flipped to a folded sheet near the back and slid it across the table. It was a check. $5,000. "To help you, go wherever that talent of yours wants to go," he said. I didn't even look at the amount. "I don't want your money," I said. He nodded slowly. "I figured you might say that." "Then why offer?" "Because it's the only language I was taught for making things right." I let the words sit there. Then I pushed the check back across the table. "There's another language," I told him. "It starts with silence, and it ends with change." He left quietly. No handshake, no smile. Just a final glance as he disappeared down the steps. And I stood there alone under the heat lamp, realizing something important. He came back not to erase what happened, but to acknowledge that it did. And sometimes, that's the only apology that matters. The staff treated me differently after that night. Not because of Kingston, because of what I'd shown them. They stopped calling me piano girl. They started asking when I'd play again. Even management asked if I'd be willing to do Sunday brunch performances. I said maybe, but only if I wasn't wearing the apron. Then came the man from table 8. A quiet, silver-haired gentleman who'd been there the night of the performance. He'd sat alone, ordered one drink, said nothing. Turns out he was a retired music producer from Nashville. He didn't throw around flashy promises, no talk of record deals or overnight fame. He just said, "I know a studio downtown. Quiet place. Would love to hear you play again. No pressure, just music." I gave him my number. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a door had opened. Not wide, not all the way, but just enough for a girl like me to step through. When I got home that night, I sat at my piano again. No crowd, no tuxedos, no audience waiting to clap or critique. Just me. I placed my fingers on the keys, and before I played a single note, I whispered, "I just wanted to play." Because that's all I ever wanted. Not applause. Not revenge. Just the right to take up space. The funny thing is, no one ever asked me what I saw when I sat at that piano. They heard the sound. They felt the moment, but they never knew what it looked like from where I was sitting. Let me tell you, I didn't see a room full of rich people or soft candlelight or white tablecloths. I saw every version of myself I've ever been. The little girl who pressed her fingers into chipped ivory keys with calloused hands. The teenager who played in church with a swollen heart and a busted sneaker. The young woman who stopped playing altogether because the world told her it wasn't practical. And then I saw her again, the version I'd nearly forgotten. The one who didn't ask for permission to be brilliant. The one who didn't explain herself. She was just music. A week later, I showed up at that quiet downtown studio with the old Nashville producer. There were no contracts, no cameras. Just a baby grand in the center of a soundproof room and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. He asked what I wanted to play. I said something for myself. And I did. Track after track. Soul, gospel, classical, improvised. He didn't interrupt. He didn't compare me to anyone. He just listened. When I was done, he sat back and said, "That was church." And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone finally saw me, all of me, without trying to shrink it, sell it, or stamp it with a label. I didn't quit my job right away. That's not how life works for people like me. But I started saying no more often. No to extra shifts that drained my soul. No to customers who thought kindness meant obedience. And more importantly, I started saying yes. Yes to teaching piano on weekends. Yes to playing in small cafes again. Yes to dreaming without shame. One Sunday afternoon, a mother came into the restaurant with her daughter. The girl was maybe 8, wearing a frilly pink dress and black patent shoes. She stood near the piano, wide-eyed, like it was a treasure chest. "Can I touch it?" she asked her mom. Before she could answer, I knelt beside her and whispered, "Yes, you can touch the keys. They belong to you too." She reached out and tapped a middle C with all the tenderness in the world. The sound was soft, but her smile, it shook me to my core. So no, I wasn't just a waitress. I was a daughter, a granddaughter, a musician, a survivor of silence. And now I'm a story. One they'll tell, not because of who tried to break me, but because of what I did when he tried. He called me just a black waitress. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't yell. I sat at a piano and reminded him that my silence was never weakness. It was a prelude. If Deborah's story moved, you subscribe for more true-to-life tales of quiet strength, dignity, and redemption. What dream have you buried because someone told you it was too late, too bold, or too much? Leave a comment. Share your moment, because your story might be the next to play out. Thank you for listening.